physical disability which would have ended the usefulness of 99 men out of 100, he carries on at the White House with an almost incredible vigor and cheerfulness. Many have wondered where this remarkable strength and endurance comes from. That question can be answered interestingly by looking back over the Roosevelt family line clear back to 1649, when the Roosevelts, Claus Martensen van Roosevelt as the family was called then, came over here from Holland. A stout Dutch burgher, Claus became the ancestor of the two branches of the Roosevelt family which have contributed so much to American history and even to the progress of the world. After him and his grandson Nicholas, who was the common ancestor of the lines which produced President Theodore Roosevelt and President Franklin D. Roosevelt, came long lines of sane, sensible, middle-class Americans who had the good sense to fall in love with and marry sane, sensible, middle-class American women. All through the history of the two branches of the famous family, those qualities of sound sense, industry, and devotion to duty, private and public, along with a fine morality, have marked the Roosevelts, one and all. Therefore, our beloved president of today is the natural heir of all these solid, worthwhile qualities. There is, you see, a reason for what he is and for the strength of mind and body which he devotes to his tremendous tasks. The Roosevelt family tree, the two stems that produced President Theodore Roosevelt and President Franklin D. Roosevelt, therefore, may be shown like this. Going back to old Claus, not very much is known about him, except that he passed from this sinful world by the year 1660, leaving 5 minor children, a small enough family, as families went in old Dutch New Amsterdam. But those orphan children grew up and married and had sons and daughters, and one of them, Nicholas, was destined to be the ancestor of 2 presidents and of many other Roosevelts who forged to the front in business, commerce, finance, and politics. Nicholas, who was born about 1656, had several children, but we're concerned with 2 only, Johannes, who was the ancestor of the Theodore Roosevelt line, and Jacobus, who was the ancestor of the Franklin D. Roosevelt line. Johannes was a solid citizen, an alderman, and a dealer in real estate. His son, Jacobus, was well past 50 when the Revolution broke out, and he served as a private soldier in the New York colonial troops. His son, James, made a success of the hardware business and died at the age of 81, leaving a son, Cornelius Van Schaik Roosevelt, who became a wealthy merchant. His son was Theodore, who was the father of the famous President Theodore, Teddy, of the Rough Riders, of the hunting and exploration adventures in Africa and South America, Teddy of the Big Stick, whose motto was always America First. Eager to take part in the Great War himself, ex-President Theodore Roosevelt, who had been colonel of the Rough Riders in the Spanish War, was denied that privilege, but with true Rooseveltian patriotism, he sent to the fighting lines in Europe his 4 sons, falls of the White House. It was Quentin who was fated to be the blood sacrifice of that branch of the Roosevelts. Almost in his first engagement with an enemy aviator, Quentin, cut off from his flying companions, was drawn into a desperate combat with several enemy planes. Fighting to the last, he was shot down over the German lines, and so highly did the enemy honor the gallantry of the ex-president's son that they bore his body to the grave with the highest military honors, and then sent immediate word to the Allied lines. And so, in France today, lies the body of the youngest son of the Theodore Roosevelt line. Alice, his oldest child, is the widow of the late Speaker Nicholas Longworth and one of the most celebrated women of America. Going back now to the other branch, the branch founded by Nicholas Roosevelt's son, Jacobus, we find the same safe, sound, steady, clean Americanism. Like the family tree of the late President Theodore Roosevelt, the family tree of Franklin D. Roosevelt contains no black crows. President Franklin's ancestor, Jacobus, had a son named Isaac, who was a sugar refiner and an important man of the early New York. It was his son, James, who established the Roosevelt Country Home at Hyde Park, New York, on the Hudson, from which our president hails. And his son, the second James, was a man of large interests. And his son, the third James Roosevelt, was the father of Franklin D. and the husband of that remarkable woman, Sarah DELANO, who lived to see her son become the first citizen of the world. When Franklin Delano married, he selected a distant relative, a niece indeed of President Theodore. Her name, as we all know, is Eleanor, daughter of the President Theodore's brother Elliot. And their children, very much in the news of the day, tall, vigorous young people, are James, the oldest son, an insurance man in Boston, Elliot, Franklin D. Jr., just out of college, and young John, along with the only daughter, Mrs. Curtis Dahl, whose children, Sisty and Buzzy, are the delight of their grandfather, the president. And now in the year 1933, the branches of the original Van Roosevelt family established in America in 1649, have widened apart so far that President Franklin D. Roosevelt is the fifth cousin only of the late President Theodore Roosevelt. Such, in brief, is the story of the Roosevelt line, which has done so much for America over the span of nearly 3 centuries.
I want to talk to you very simply and very briefly in regard to what might be called the whole of the picture. Not merely to provide bread and butter, not merely to keep people from starving. You have the further great social opportunity of inculcating even more than it is inculcated today in this country, the understanding that we've got to build from the bottom up and not merely supply food from the top down.